Command, McCort. Little background, started my life as an F-4 pilot right out of the training command and went to the West Coast to VF-154. Following that tour, I did a tour at Top Gun. Following that tour, I did a transition to F-14s, then another tour back to Top Gun. Down the road, a transition to F-18s. Had the opportunity to fly an exchange tour with the Dutch Air Force, flying F-104s, an exchange tour with the Air Force, flying both F-5s, and some interesting airplanes up in the northern ranges. Got a lot of flight time and a lot of traps, many squadrons. Ended up in VF-111, which by coincidence was the same squadron that my dad had been in World War II as a fighter pilot flying Hellcats and Corsairs. So that was quite an experience for me to in fact take my father on deployment on a Tiger cruise and have him walk into the ready room of a ship, and they pulled out the logbooks and the photos from his day, and of course his pictures were in it, and we had a really good time doing that. That led to a small video that we made at NAS Miramar back when it was a Naval Air Station. Anyway, following my fighter pilot time, I had an opportunity to come down here to Pensacola and take over as Commodore, and in the meantime, with a lot of operational experience, learned a little bit more about the town and got very much involved in the inner workings of Pensacola and a little more of its history and heritage. Now, an aside along the way, when I was in 154 as a very, very new Nugget pilot, preparing for my first deployment, it turned out that my sister, Peggy, was going to be married up in Michigan. So we're in San Diego. I got one of my best friends, Doc White, one of my other best friends who is a radar intercept officer, or RIO, Chris Allison, call sign Sniffer, who flew with me, and we took two airplanes, two Phantoms, up to Michigan, landed at Sulphur's Air Force Base, and to attend the wedding. Now, of course, this is my first time taking the go fast, smoking, hulking Phantom back home to show both my dad, my family, and brothers and sisters and so forth, what I'm doing with my life. So an opportunity that could not be passed up. The wedding, of course, was in the spring. It was a beautiful day. We fly across country, and we descend down and head towards Sulphur's Air Force Base to enter the break and want to look really good for the family. So we had briefed a proper, what we call fan break at high speed, lots of noise, even though it was an Air Force base, recognizing that generally is not really happily received, but nonetheless, we figured that was the way to go. The good news is the weather was perfect. The break went well. The bad news is there was an airplane on the runway. So at the very, very approach end of the runway, there was a T-39 Sabreliner, and it was a VIP Sabreliner. And by coincidence, in that airplane on that day was a general by the name of Chappie James, hence the tie into Pensacola. So here's me, young fighter pilot, Lieutenant JG, into the break, pulling 6 Gs and descending, realizing that the speed is not going to allow me to touch down without the other airplane still being on the runway. So Tower, of course, sees this as well, and halfway through the turn, they advise that I'm going to need to go around to provide proper clearance for the T-39. Well, not being one to pass up the opportunity with my family watching to show them what the F-4 can do, I simply told my wingman that we're going to go around in section, plugged in the afterburners, and continued to descend as I raised the landing gear and the flaps. So this was looking really good. When the F-4 at low altitude and configuration will accelerate pretty well and make some pretty good noise. So I'm probably doing, easily 450, 500 knots about the approach end of the runway as I fly just a couple feet over the top of this T-39, thinking we're looking really good. So I blow by it and thump it really good, and then my wingman does the same thing. And then at the other end of the field, of course, I pitch up to give it room for its departure. Now, little did I know that there was this very senior Air Force officer inside that airplane. And even less did I know that the pilot at the controls of that airplane was an Air Force major worried about his career and what the general might be thinking. So here's where the story gets interesting. We do the whole weekend thing because this is a weekend cross country. And when I come back on Monday, actually arrive on Sunday, when I come to work on Monday, the first words I get are, you need to come and see the skipper. And the skipper needs to come and see the CAG. And the CAG needs to come and see the battle group commander. Because what had happened is that the Air Force 04 flying that airplane had reported a near miss and a low flyby, very unsafely done, to his command. That, of course, rocketed the information vertically up to the stratosphere and then laterally from the Air Force over to the Navy and back down through the chain of command over to the blast in the chest that my skipper got. That turned into a blast in the chest for me. And then, of course, what came out of all this is that the Air Force was after my wings. So here I am, a newly minted Air Force fighter pilot, or Navy fighter pilot, about to lose my wings. It became very clear now this was very serious. So I had two things going for me that were very important. One, a terrific CO. His call sign was Mighty Mac. And Mighty Mac was a bulldog of a guy who was not going to stand there and let the Air Force basically blow up one of his young JOs. That was good news, as opposed to him trying to cover his own butt and see to it that it all went well. He just fired me. Then the other, as it turns out, while all this is going on, word filters up. Once the CAG shows up and he tears up on my CO, CO's still protecting me. CAG's not so much protecting me, but he's still worthy of in the fight. He doesn't want to just give up to the Air Force. And this thing is ratcheting up in terms of chain of command elevation to the point where it's gotten into the stars, as in general officer and Navy flag officer level, doing this battle. It's also very clear that it's going to end up with me losing my wings. Here's the point where happily, because up to now, General James had not been apprised of any of this. And as it turns out, General James was an F-4 guy from Vietnam. General James loves Phantoms. And in fact, when I went over and my wingman went over the top of his airplane, he was back in the airplane rooting and having a good time at the sound and smell of afterburners flying right over top the airplane. So when word finally got to him that something was going on and that the guy who did all that stuff was about to lose his wings, he happily, for me, stepped up and said, "Stop all this nonsense. He was just doing what young fighter pilots should do. I want this to come to an end right now." And so as a result of that, I had this happily long, illustrious career in the Navy, flying airplanes, and still have my wings to this day. So my story, as a result, a personal opportunity to meet Chappie James and thank him for his stepping in and basically saving my butt. And that was back in the year 1976. It was near the bicentennial of the country and a pretty interesting time. My story with me and General Chappie James.